It was an ordinary morning in the narrow streets of Noida, where life moved in its usual rhythm. Vendors shouting, children rushing to school, and office workers lost in their daily routines. But that calm morning was about to turn into a nightmare no one in the city could ever forget. Around 8 a.m., a group of laborers working near the banks of the Yamuna River noticed something strange floating in the muddy water. At first, they thought it was just a pile of garbage, but as it came closer, the horrifying truth revealed itself. It was a woman's body wrapped tightly in plastic, her face almost unrecognizable. Panic spread instantly. Someone called the police, and soon a team from Noida police reached the spot. They carefully pulled the body to the shore. The stench of decay filled the air. The woman was around 50 years old. Her face was disfigured, possibly from blunt force, and her clothes were torn. It was clear, this wasn't an accident. This was a brutal murder. The officers started their initial investigation. There were no identity cards, no jewelry, no phone. Whoever killed her had made sure to erase every clue. The only thing they had was the body and a few strands of hair stuck to the plastic sheet. Maybe belonging to the killer, maybe not. But something about the way the body was dumped suggested this was not a random act. It looked planned. As the body was sent for post-mortem, police began checking missing person reports from nearby areas: Delhi, Noida, Ghaziabad. After a few hours, one report caught their attention. A 50-year-old woman named Yashoda had been missing for 3 days from Sector 62, Noida. The details matched: her height, her build, even the color of her sari. Officers reached the given address, a small 2-story house. A young man opened the door. He looked nervous, his eyes tired, as if he hadn't slept for days. "Are you Kaushal?" the officer asked. He nodded slowly. When the police showed him a picture of the body, he froze. His lips trembled, his eyes filled with tears. "That's my mother," he whispered. The silence in that small room was suffocating. The officers offered condolences, but quickly began their questioning. "When did you last see her?" one of them asked. Kaushal said that 3 days ago his mother had left the house after an argument. "She said she needed some air," he added. "She didn't come back." The officers asked more. Did she have any enemies? Any disputes? Kaushal shook his head. No, she was a simple woman. She used to teach part-time. Everyone respected her. His tone sounded sincere, but the police noticed something off. He wasn't acting like a son who had just identified his murdered mother. There were no sobs, no breakdown, only an eerie calmness. After leaving the house, the investigating officer spoke quietly to his junior. "Something's wrong here," he said. "That boy's expression doesn't match his words." Meanwhile, the post-mortem report arrived. It revealed that Yashoda had died due to suffocation, and there were marks on her wrists and neck suggesting she was tied before being killed. The report also indicated she was murdered elsewhere and then dumped in the river. The time of death: 3 days ago, the same night she went missing. Now the police were sure this wasn't just a random crime. They started investigating her background. Yashoda had been a widow for many years. Her husband, a government employee, had died in an accident. She lived alone with her only son, Kaushal, who was 24. Neighbors described her as kind but often sad. "She loved her son a lot," said one elderly woman, "but recently they used to argue a lot. We could hear their fights almost every night." That statement caught the attention of the officers. They checked Kaushal's phone records and found something shocking. On the night Yashoda disappeared, Kaushal's phone was active near the Yamuna River for almost an hour, the same area where her body was found. When they confronted him with this, his calm expression started to crack. I just went there with friends," he said, stammering. But when asked to name those friends, his voice broke. He couldn't answer. That was the first major clue. Police detained him for questioning. At first, he denied everything. "I loved my mother," he kept repeating. But as hours passed and evidence mounted, his resistance began to crumble. After 12 hours of interrogation, Kaushal finally confessed. But what he revealed left even the officers speechless. With tears in his eyes, Kaushal whispered, "Yes, I killed her, but you don't understand. She destroyed my life first." The officer leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Kaushal took a deep breath and began to speak. "My father died when I was young. My mother raised me alone. She was strict, but I respected her. Things changed when I turned 18. She started suspecting me of everything. She didn't let me go out, didn't let me meet friends. She would check my phone, follow me everywhere. I felt suffocated at first. The officers thought it was just a typical mother-son conflict, but Kaushal's tone turned darker. She started behaving strangely," he continued. "Sometimes she'd hug me and cry, saying she couldn't live without me. But sometimes she'd scream and curse, saying I reminded her of my father who left her alone. I didn't understand what she wanted from me. It felt like she hated me and loved me at the same time." His voice trembled. "Then a few months ago, I met a girl online. We started talking. My mother found out and went crazy. She said that girl would separate us. She even threatened the girl. I begged her to stop, but she didn't listen. That's when I started hating her." The officers listened in silence. There was deep pain in his words, but also coldness. "One night," he said, "she told me that I had ruined her life. She slapped me in front of neighbors. That night, something broke inside me. I decided I couldn't take it anymore." He paused, his eyes blank. "I called my 2 friends. We made a plan." The officer's voice was calm but sharp. "What plan, Kaushal?" Kaushal looked down, his hands shaking. "To end it. To end her. Forever." The confession hung in the air like a storm waiting to burst. The room felt colder. The officers exchanged glances. They knew what was coming next would uncover a truth darker than they could imagine. The lead investigator switched off the recorder for a moment. "Tell us everything, Kaushal," he said softly. "What happened that night?" Kaushal looked up, a strange emptiness in his eyes. "You really want to know?" he asked. "Then I'll tell you how a son turned into a killer, and how a mother's love turned into a curse." "Tell us everything, Kaushal," the officer repeated, his tone calm but firm. Kaushal stared at the floor, silent for a long moment. Then he took a deep breath and began to speak. Slowly, as if each word carried the weight of guilt he could no longer bear. "It was the night of July 18th, he said softly. It had been raining since evening. My mother and I had another fight, a terrible one. She had found my phone again. She called that girl and insulted her, told her to stay away from me. I lost control. I yelled back, but she slapped me again. She said, you'll destroy your life just like your father did mine." I couldn't take it anymore. Kaushal looked up, his eyes glassy. "I called my friends, Rohit and Tushar. They were the only people I trusted. We met at a tea stall near the main road around 10 p.m. I told them I needed to scare her, maybe just teach her a lesson. But deep down, I knew what I really wanted. The rain had stopped by the time they returned to the house. Yashoda was sleeping inside her room, unaware of the storm about to break loose. Kaushal opened the back gate quietly and his two friends followed. They carried a rope, a plastic sheet, and gloves. At first, Kaushal hesitated. He stood by the door, his hand trembling. "Maybe we should stop," he whispered. But then he remembered her harsh words, her endless control, her interference, her threats. Every memory of pain came flooding back. His anger overpowered his hesitation. They entered the room. The faint light from the street lamp fell across Yashoda's face. She was sleeping peacefully, perhaps for the last time. Kaushal whispered to his friends, "Do it quickly." Rohit stepped forward first, pressing a cloth over her mouth. Yashoda woke up in panic, struggling to breathe, kicking the blanket away. Kaushal froze for a second, watching his mother's eyes widen in terror. She recognized him, her own son, standing there in the dark. "Kaushal?" she gasped, her voice muffled. That one word, his name, broke something inside him. He rushed forward and held her down. "You never let me live," he shouted, his voice trembling with rage. "You ruined everything." Yashoda tried to free herself, tears streaming down her face. "Please stop," she begged, but it was too late. The struggle lasted barely a minute. When it was over, silence filled the room. A silence so deep it felt like the world itself had stopped breathing. Kaushal stepped back, panting heavily. His hands were shaking, his heart pounding so loud it echoed in his ears. His mother's lifeless eyes stared back at him, not with anger but with something far worse. Disappointment. For a moment he thought about what he had done. The woman who had carried him, fed him, cared for him, now lay dead because of him. He wanted to scream, to undo everything. But the sound wouldn't come out. His friends were panicking. "We have to hide the body," Rohit whispered harshly. They wrapped her in the plastic sheet, tied it with the rope, and cleaned the floor as best as they could. Every drop of blood felt like a curse. Every movement felt heavier than the last. Kaushal's mind was numb. He wasn't thinking clearly, only acting. Around 2 a.m. they carried the body out through the back gate. The neighborhood was quiet, rain still dripping from the rooftops. They loaded the bundle into the trunk of an old car. Kaushal sat in the front seat, staring blankly out of the window, his hands cold and numb. They drove toward the Yamuna River. The city lights faded behind them, replaced by the dark, wet roads of the riverbank. A thick fog had settled over the area, making everything eerily silent. When they reached the bridge, they stopped. "This is it," Tushar said quietly. They pulled the body out of the car. Kaushal stood still, staring at it for a long time. "Say goodbye," Rohit whispered sarcastically. But Kaushal didn't move. His throat tightened, and for a second he almost broke down. He took a step forward and whispered under his breath, "I'm sorry, Ma." With that, they pushed the body into the cold, dark water. It sank slowly, disappearing beneath the surface, taking with it every shred of humanity Kaushal had left. The three of them stood there in silence, watching the ripples fade away. The sound of the water mixed with the faint rumble of thunder. The deed was done. But guilt is a strange thing. It doesn't vanish with the body, it stays, crawling under the skin, whispering in the dark corners of the mind. And for Kaushal, It had already begun. When he returned home that night, the house felt empty, lifeless. Her smell lingered in the air, the scent of soap and incense. He looked around and realized how quiet everything was without her voice. For the first time in years, no one was shouting at him. But instead of relief, there was a suffocating silence that felt like punishment. The next morning, he tried to act normal. He even called a few relatives, pretending his mother had gone to visit a friend. But deep down, he knew something inside him had already started to rot. Every knock on the door made his heart race. Every sound in the night felt like her voice calling his name. 3 days later, when the police arrived with news that a woman's body had been found, Kaushal knew the moment of truth had come. He thought he could hide it. He thought no one would ever find out. But as soon as he saw that picture, the bruised face, the torn sari, his entire world shattered. The guilt that had been burning inside him finally consumed him completely. During interrogation, he told the officers everything from the fight to the dumping. But there was something more that still haunted him. Something he hadn't told anyone yet. As he finished describing the night of the murder, he looked at the lead investigator and said, "You think you know everything, but you don't. There's one thing I haven't told you, something she said before she died." The officer leaned forward. "What did she say, Kaushal?" Kaushal's eyes filled with tears. "She said, 'I forgive you.'" The room fell silent. No one spoke. Even the officer felt a chill run down his spine. That single line, the mother's final words, cut through every wall of anger, hatred, and revenge. It was the most painful truth of all. Kaushal buried his face in his hands and began to cry for the first time since it all happened. "She forgave me," he whispered, and I still killed her." The confession was complete, but the story wasn't over. Not yet. Because as the investigation continued, police discovered that there might be something deeper behind Yashoda's strange behavior. Something that could change the entire perception of what really happened between her and her son. What was it? Was Yashoda truly the possessive, controlling mother Kaushal described? Or was there another side to this story that no one had seen yet? Days passed after Kaushal's confession, but the mystery surrounding Yashoda's strange behavior still troubled the investigators. Something didn't add up. Why would a mother suddenly become so controlling and unstable? Why did the neighbors say she seemed scared in her final weeks? The lead officer, Inspector Rajveer, decided to dig deeper. He knew that sometimes the truth hides in the quiet corners of a victim's life, in diaries, messages, or memories left behind. When the police searched Yashoda's room again, they found a small wooden box hidden beneath her bed. Inside it were letters, old photographs, and a diary with faded pages. The diary began 10 years ago after her husband's death. As the officers read, the words painted a picture far more tragic than anyone expected. Yashoda had loved her husband deeply, but his sudden death had shattered her. She had struggled alone to raise Kaushal, working long hours as a tutor, sacrificing her own dreams so her son could have a better life. Her writing started off with hope and pride in her boy. But as the years passed, the tone grew darker. She wrote about loneliness, fear of growing old, and the pain of seeing her son drift away from her. One entry stood out. "Kaushal doesn't talk to me anymore. He laughs with his friends but looks at me like a stranger. I'm losing him just like I lost his father. I can't bear that pain again." The entries after that were heartbreaking. She described panic attacks, sleepless nights, and an overwhelming fear that her son would abandon her. She had seen a doctor who diagnosed her with severe depression and borderline personality disorder, a mental condition that made her intensely afraid of losing those she loved. She had stopped taking her medicines months before her death. The officers realized what Kaushal never did. His mother wasn't evil or controlling by choice. She was sick, emotionally fragile, and desperate to keep her only son close. Her love had turned into obsession, not because she wanted to hurt him, but because she didn't know how to let go. Inspector Rajveer decided to confront Kaushal with this truth. In the interrogation room, Kaushal sat quietly, his eyes hollow, his wrists cuffed to the table. When the officer placed the diary before him, he hesitated. "What's this?" Kaushal asked softly. "It's your mother's diary," the inspector replied. "She wrote about you, about how much she loved you. You should read it." Kaushal's hands trembled as he opened the book. At first, he could barely look at the words, but as he read, tears began to roll down his cheeks. His mother's handwriting, shaky but full of love, spoke directly to him from beyond the grave. "He is my only reason to live. I pray every night that he never leaves me alone." He broke down completely. "She wasn't angry with me," he whispered. "She was scared." The realization hit him like lightning. Everything he had believed on, all the hatred, all the blame, collapsed in an instant. Inspector Rajveer looked at him quietly. "She forgave you before she died, Kaushal. Maybe she already knew you would regret it." The trial began weeks later. The courtroom was packed, reporters swarming outside. Kaushal was charged with murder under Section 302. His friends, Rohit and Tushar, were charged as accomplices. During the hearings, the defense lawyer tried to argue that Kaushal acted under emotional distress, that years of psychological pressure had broken his mind. But the prosecution painted a harsher picture. A cold-blooded son who killed his own mother for freedom. In the end, the court sentenced Kaushal to life imprisonment, while his friends received lesser terms for assisting in the crime. When the verdict was announced, Kaushal didn't react. He simply bowed his head and whispered, "Maybe this is what I deserve." But something inside him had changed. In prison, he requested to see a counselor. He wanted to understand what drove him to that point, not to justify it, but to face it. Over time, he began to write letters to his mother. He filled pages with apologies, with memories of childhood, with questions that would never be answered. In one letter he wrote, "You gave me everything and I gave you death. I don't know if heaven exists, but if it does, I hope you can see I'm sorry. I finally understand you weren't my enemy. You were just broken like me." Months later, Inspector Rajveer visited him in jail. "I read your letters," he said. "You've changed." Kaushal nodded quietly. "I've learned that sometimes love can turn into something dark when there's too much fear," he said. "But even then, it's still love." The inspector sighed. "Your story will always haunt this city, Kaushal. Not because it's about murder, but because it's about misunderstanding." Outside the prison walls, Yashoda's story became a topic of public debate. Some people called her a controlling mother. Others said she was a victim of mental illness and loneliness. News channels ran shows titled "When Love Becomes Possession." Psychologists discussed how emotional trauma can destroy even the purest bonds. But the truth was much simpler and much sadder. A son and mother, both broken in their own ways, destroyed each other because they never truly spoke, never truly understood. Years later, Kaushal still writes in his journal every night. He says he feels her presence sometimes, in his dreams, in the wind that blows through his prison window. And every time he hears the river in the distance, he remembers the night he lost everything. As he told the counselor one day, "That night I killed her, but I also killed the part of me that loved her." The counselor asked him gently, "Do you think she would forgive you now?" Kaushal smiled faintly, looking up at the ceiling. "She already did," he said. "I just wasn't ready to believe it." And maybe that was the real tragedy of it all. A story not of hate, but of love that couldn't find its way through pain.